So, Michael, I've been very much looking forward to having this conversation with you today. I will have introduced you before this conversation, but I'd love to hear from you how you might introduce yourself in a few sentences.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess the first thing I think of is a storyteller. So ever since I was like 13, I had insight or a sense of the power of story.
Mm.
And then that led me to eventually studying mythology, which is like the big frame of stories. And so eventually I wind up um living through stories or having stories lived through me. That's what I think happened.
I'm
And
so intrigued about the having stories lived through you, but so I'm going to put a pin in that. And before we dive into the juicy stuff, because this is going to be a shimmering rabbit hole conversation of just unexpected jewels, I can tell. Um, Before we embark upon this adventure, or as a threshold moment, what does creativity mean to you? And would you say that you're creative?
um, creativity is the essential, ongoing, living process that we are all in. So when I went to school, they told me that creation happened. Well, if you went to church, they said it happened at this particular time. You went to school, well, they were moving it around, but it was pretty long time ago, and we're in the aftermath of creation. But it turns out that creation is an ongoing thing, and we are living in creation all the time. And I mean that. And if in studying mythology, so the most creation myths begin with eternal darkness, and often they say the eternal dark waters, as if water is so ubiquitous you can't get rid of it. And then it's separated, and light and dark separated, and that was the beginning of creation. But it's still ongoing because every day the light disappears and the darkness comes back. Although now we have all these incandescent lights, so we have pretend daytime at the end of daytime. But people used to think that eternity came back at the end of the day.
Hmm.
And the light came from the stars and the moon, and people were connected at that level to the darkness and to the eternal. And I think people had a greater sense of creativity, realizing that each morning, daybreak, was creation happening all over again.
Hmm.
And so I think we're all living in creativity and creation, but we're all on the verge of destruction because of what's going on in the world right now. So we're in very creative times if we could understand that. We're in mythic times because we're in creation destruction. Everybody's feeling the possible tension of that. And then I think the question was, do I think of myself as creative?
Hmm.
On a good day, yes. I mean, I get up in the morning to participate in creativity. It's actually my morning practice usually revolves around writing.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's book writing, but whether it's book writing, I'm writing. And what I'm writing is about stories or about dreams, which are stories, or about whatever I'm interested in. And I begin the day in what for me is a creative medium, which also means I never know where it's going, which I've gotten more used to over time. And now we all live in a world where no one knows where it's going, which
Hmm.
is another indication that we are at the edge of creation.
Hmm. So there's a few things that come to mind as you described this false day at the end of the day with the incandescent lights, and that this perhaps prevents us from being able to connect with and find relationship again with that which is so much bigger than us, like these sources of dream, of liminal sort of archetypal realms, if you like, and also something about the fear of the darkness. And that actually, in talking about the first thing that you said about these eternal waters and then the split with light and dark, and I like to think of the void as this fertile place, kind of like a womb perhaps, or something else, where imaginal things can be dreamed into being, or can summon us to speak them into being or to give form. And so there's this curious thing happening where we're holding the dark at bay with our electricity and means of kind of keeping things at the outside of our homes and the rest of it. And yet, on a civilizational level, and you mentioned this, there's so much darkness on a metaphorical level in terms of the amount of suffering, uncertainty, cruelty. What are the different kinds of darkness that we can relate to, and how can creativity help us navigate the time that we're in?
Good question. So, in a way, you could say we're in the dark times again. It's happened before. And even though there are lights on all around the world now, when you look at the earth, there's all this light coming out of the earth. We're actually in dark times. And maybe people know that, and that's why they're turning on the lights. But at the same time, it's like a collective fear of darkness. And the problem with that is all light comes from the dark. That's what creation's. It was eternally dark, and then the light came. And so we're missing our connection to the source of recreation. I like to imagine, sundials. I thought they were really interesting things. But when the sun went down, the dial stopped working, and the day was over. The word dial comes from day, and so the day was over, and then people went into the night. And I think they felt a greater connection to the cosmos. And the cosmos, or the universe as they call it now, is 97% darkness.
Oh, wow.
The Enlightenment, remember the Enlightenment? They were going to shine a light everywhere. Telescopes out into the cosmos, microscopes down into the cellular level. And what did they found? They found darkness. The Enlightenment discovered dark energy. It led to the discovery of dark energy and black holes.
Yeah.
In other, and so we're now living in the endarkenment that follows after the realization that the Enlightenment was a failed creative adventure. But I think in terms of mythology, there's a Native American story that I love because it's about how the first people, that would be all of our ancestors, wound up settling in a certain place. And they were doing pretty well. Actually, they had to find the place because every other place they went to, they weren't having big dreams and they weren't resting enough. So they found this place where they rested and they were having big dreams and everything was great. But in this world, everything can only be great for a while. Change is always happening. So some people got sick. And no one knew what sickness was, much less what healing was. So people just distanced themselves from the ones who were sick. And then people were divided. And they kept becoming more divided. And so then 4 people had the inspiration to go out at the end of the day, because there were no incandescent lights, and just stand facing the darkness, because there were no answers in the village, just like there are no answers in the conferences, in the incandescent light world, trying to solve world problems. So they went out and so then what happened is the one who created the world, that's how they describe the creator, tells them, speaks to them directly from the dark and says, for every trouble on earth, there's a solution. For every sickness, there's a remedy. For every illness, there's an antidote. And that was the first knowledge that people had, and it came from the darkness. And so every night they went out and stood in the darkness, and they kept getting knowledge from the darkness. And so that's what I think about now that we're in the dark times, that we have to face not just the darkness, but the not knowing. That is a primary step on the way to knowing something else. If we can't admit that we don't know, we can't find knowledge. Just like those first people. No one knew what to do. They faced the dark. So we have to face the darkness. That's true for the individual. If I want to change my life or expand my consciousness or whatever, then I have to face the darkness inside. And now collectively, we're in the dark. Right now, today, no one knows what's going to happen next. And 5-year plans and all the agendas that people have. Honestly, no one knows what's going to happen next. If we can own that, then we are standing in the tension of creativity.
Mm.
So I'll mention that also. So here in the United States, people think that there's two different worlds. You know, they call them the conservative, the liberal,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
the red and the blue. They're like different worlds. But I always say we're all in the same story. We're just in the story of a divided world.
Yeah.
We're all in it. We're just in
Yeah.
a divided story. And then the next thing that occurs to me is what they call the tension of the opposites. Because people say, well, it's polarized. The word polarized comes from the idea of the poles at the ends of the earth. So being polarized doesn't mean just divided. It means divided in the extreme,
Mm.
which is how life is now. And so, but if we understand the tension of the opposites, the idea is to hold that tension long enough for the third thing to appear. Not the thing a person thinks through, not the rational conclusion of a committee. The unknown third thing
Mm.
arises from holding the tension of the opposites, whether it's the individual psyche or the collective community. And in holding that tension, we inevitably are facing darkness because we're facing the unknown. I think that's our cultural condition worldwide. And it's the exact condition of creativity.
Mm.
The creative artist, I have a friend who's a painter, and I go to her studio and there's the blank. She's starting a new thing, and I think, what do you do? She goes, well, I just stand here. And then I see images coming through the canvas, and then I
Oh
paint
wow.
what's coming through. But But for the moments before they're coming through, it's her and blankness in that
Yeah.
case. I think that's true for all of us. If we can get into the right tension and tolerate it, accept, I don't know what's coming next, we are on the verge of creativity.
This is so fascinating. I'm also a painter and I sing, and as a storyteller, these are, yourself, there are very many ways in which we can call upon the dark to gift us stories that then can be lived through us, as you beautifully mentioned, or to ask for things that need to be given form. And I recently had a really curious experience. I have a shamanic practice, which is where I get my paintings and many of my songs from. And I had this experience where I found myself in this black and white world on the edge of this huge abyss. And I was literally with my toes curling around the edge. And there was a crow next to me. And I just tipped into this abyss, into this deep, dark hole, and was just falling. And Crow turns to me, as crows can in these sorts of mythic places, and says, "Sing." And so I start singing this particular song, and the abyss turns into this lush green valley and completely transforms. And at a later stage in this journey, I encounter this idea of chaos and order, beauty and pain, and how everything that happens in our experience happens because if it weren't to happen altogether, it wouldn't happen at all. So there have to be, as you mentioned, these polar opposites. And then the question is, how do you hold or be with the pain and the suffering in the world in such a way that you can be compassionate towards it and not freeze, and then bring your creativity to bear to help heal what can be healed in the face of this, without even knowing the purpose of human suffering, which I don't know if that's even something one can answer. But there's something about what you described about the darkness, about the uncertainty, and having some kind of creative thread or practice that one can call upon. So as you take each tender step into the darkness, with whatever feelings are coming up, with the fear or the uncertainty or whatever it might be, that there is some kind of creative thread that can bring you forward, whether it's storytelling or singing or I don't know what else. But I wonder if there are creative practices that you could point towards that you found helpful for people when they've encountered this dark and don't know what to do, or get so gripped by overwhelm and fear that they need to find another way to open and to somehow move with it.
Great question. I want to go to the personal, the individual, but first I want to go to the bigger picture because they're connected.
Mm.
So one of the ways people describe the current condition of the world is apocalyptic.
Hmm.
I mean, literally, Israel and Iran are back in that old Middle Eastern battle that has been going on and quieting down and going on and now getting worse again. And no one knows what's going to happen. And people think, oh, this is apocalyptic. And I would say, yes, it is. But the word apocalypse doesn't mean fiery end of the world. It means collapse renewal. The word itself, it has two basic meanings. One is a lifting of the veil.
Hmm.
So the veil lifts and we see the underlying tension. The veil is lifting now. The political stuff is happening right out in the open. Stuff that used to be in the back room is right out on TV. And so the veil is lifted. We're seeing the raw energies and the raw conflicts and tensions of the world right now. And even though it's happening in the world, and some people say, I can't look at it, the soul feels it.
Hmm.
So the individual soul knows that things are coming apart. And I think it's important that we know mythological knowledge, which says collapse leads to renewal. And it isn't just that it collapses and then it renews, it's collapsing and renewing at the same time.
Hmm.
And so then we, the poor, frail individuals that don't know what to do, we're the witnesses of the collapse, but we are also the potential agents of the renewal. That is to say, if we can find the right thread, I call it the thread of our genius, and we begin to figure out which thread to work with, we then are still the sad, nowadays often sorrowful witnesses of the condition of suffering in the world, but we are also the potential agents of creation, helping the world renew and recreate from the very darkness that everybody's afraid of. So then the question is, what does the individual do? So my theory, well, let's start out with a conflict first, because everything's so conflicted. So the conflict about the nature of the individual person, and in particular, the individual soul, there's two possibilities. There's one called tabula rasa, which is Latin for blank slate. And the idea is the person comes in as a blank slate. And then their family writes on them, and then their neighborhood writes on them, and their school writes on them, and then they're the sum of all those things. But the other story, which was the universal story through all cultures, is that a person comes in gifted and aimed.
Hmm.
And that idea of having gifts to give and an aim in life or a purpose that's woven in from the beginning.
Hmm.
And I call the term I use is genius. Not that everybody has a high IQ or a great talent. Everybody has their own genius. The word genius means the spirit that's already there when you come into the world. So we all come in with a companion spirit or an inner genius that is trying to awaken.
Hmm.
The genius of a person is unique to them, and it's not necessarily a happy thing for their family.
Hmm.
Because the family, who doesn't know the genius of its own children, has its own needs and its own wants and its own desires. And so the family wants someone to become a lawyer
Yeah.
or whatever it might be, or they wish they had not gotten a daughter. They wish it was a son. All these things are laid on to the infant
Hmm.
coming in. The infant has no choice but to adapt in order to get fed and get loved and protected. And so we wind up adapting to the expectations of other people. And what gets often lost is the genius that was there to begin with.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. But mythology assures us that the genius is there. So then the trick is, how do I connect to the genius? So if a person says, well, I don't even know what my genius is, that's a problem. But everybody has that problem in the modern world. So then we go back and usually I look at adolescence and youth.
Hmm.
Because that's when something starts to wake up. Things wake up in a person. And if we were in a traditional culture, we would be pulled into a rite of passage, the
Yeah.
purpose of which would be to awaken the inner nature and natural spirit of each girl and each boy. That would be the thing that would happen after childhood.
Hmm.
We don't actually get that. But this is so important to the individual life and to the world, that each person has this inner spirit, inner genius, inner aim, that it happens anyway. It just happens in ways that are confusing and incomplete. Am I making sense? So,
Totally.
so if a person can go back to when they were adolescent and youth, you can usually pick up a thread.
Mm.
Um, and so someone would say, well, yeah, I always loved to sing, but
Yeah.
I had to make a living. And, well, if you go back and pick that up and in the darkness of not knowing, in the tension of a confusing world, some people just need to sing.
Yeah.
And when they sing, they're aligning with their own genius. And it doesn't matter. It's not like The Voice or somebody's got talent. No, it doesn't matter. The voice is unique. And voicing, if you mentioned shamanism,
Mm.
the idea of aligning with the inner voice can change a person's entire life.
Mm.
And it can align person with a sense of depth and inner unity that solves the problem of darkness and suffering, at least for a moment.
Yeah.
While you were talking, I had this little vision of this friend I had, and honestly, I don't even know where he is now or what happened, but he grew up in Iraq and partially in Iran, and
Mm.
he became a political activist against the regimes, and so he was attacked and he was put in jail several times. But one time he was thrown into this deep, dark dungeon and
Oof.
beaten so that they thought he was going to die there. And what happened to him is when he started to awaken from all of this mistreatment, he could hear this beautiful voice singing.
Oh.
And he thought he was in heaven. He thought he had died and gone to heaven. And as he continued to awaken, he realized he was the one singing.
Oh.
And
That's heartrending.
yeah, and then he continued to sing and he pulled himself back together. He was broken spiritually and emotionally and well as physically. And then he eventually got out and he wound up getting out of that area and he wound up over here in Canada and the United States. And the way I met him, people wanted me to meet him. And I was we're going to this camp, like a retreat and it was around a lake, and I was coming down the hill towards the lake, and all I could hear was this voice, like the lake was singing in this amazing way, and it took me a while to get to where he was, and he was this little short man standing at the edge of this lake, which was echoing his voice beyond belief. It was so beautiful. And then he told me the story. He had never sung before he awakened from torture singing. And that was his genius, and so he became a singer, and he would take the poems of Rumi and Hafez and
Mm.
all these mystical poems, and he would sing them spontaneously, not prepared, in the moment. And so it's an extreme story, but it has all the parts in it.
Mm.
The song in him was not conscious in him. And it took a bunch of torture and pain and feeling lost and rejected for it to come out. I'm not saying everybody should get beat up
Mm.
and, asked to be thrown in the dungeon. Usually our personal pain is enough.
Yeah.
So our creativity and our natural, unique, instinctive way of being alive in the world is usually buried under adaptations we made in order to grow and survive our family and make it through school and all that kind of stuff. And so the trick is for a person to find that thread. In his case, it was a voice, and it was a
Mm.
profound voice, but it could be anybody's voice. In your case, it's painting. There's so many ways it can manifest. And I think the important thing is in everyone. And since we're in such times of collapse and potential destruction, but also potential creation, the change isn't going to come from leadership somewhere or some heroic source, and it's not going to come from committee meetings.
Mm.
I think it's going to come from people awakening to who they are inside and who they're intended to be and what their natural gifts are. And if that happens to enough people, then without even coordinating, creativity enters the world through the people that are awakening in the time of darkness.
Mm. Well, it's curious you mentioned this chap. My grandfather was born in Iran. He's Iranian. My mum was born in Iran, and they were exiled essentially. Well, they had to leave for their lives, but there is something so extraordinary about hearing music that comes from a bloodline. I've never been to Iran, but I remember once being at a concert. It was a festival of world music, And these two sisters came on stage with some of their group, because some of their band members had been refused entry to the UK because of visa. You know, our government was also just being ridiculous. And they started singing. And I don't speak Farsi, but they started singing and something cracked open and I was crying for the entire set. It was about an hour. And there's something so profoundly moving and healing in something that can carry you and hold you in a way that you can't even put words to, perhaps, but that opens your ability to feel into the joy and the sorrow, everything all at once. That I think music has this capacity to create a space in which we can be at one with all of the complexity of what it means to be alive in a place which is so full of horror and beauty. And you mentioned earlier about these rites of passages, which so many cultures are missing. Are there ways in which we can help one another, especially if those folks that we are connected with, family members or friends, don't know what they're missing, and yet they're expressing a sense of malaise or deep anxiety? Are there particular practices that you would propose that would be helpful for people to kind of lean into to reconnect with that specific kind of genius that they might have, or to help uncover it?
So it's tricky because so rites of passage is a pattern, and you can learn things from the pattern. But the aim of the pattern is to awaken the unique soul.
Mm.
So the problem is that each person is unique. That's guaranteed. That's the basic. And so that means the way of awakening can be unique. So it's like experimental in a sense. But like talking about music and song, that's the universal thing that quiets the beasts, whether it's the outer beasts of injustice or the inner beasts of fear, beasts of anxiety and fear. So when a person says, "Oh, I just love this kind of music," or that's a key. I mean, the mythological figure there is Eros, the god of connections, which in certain Greek myths was the first god to appear, because if Eros didn't appear, nothing but be connected. And so Eros came early. So the things that are truly compelling, and people do it all the time. I love this art. Well, there's more there than the person in the museum can explain usually. There, I think about painting, and when I used to ditch high school in the afternoon because I was going to school in Manhattan and New York, and I could go to the museums for free as a student. And I would skip the classes and just go and stand in front of the most amazing paintings in the world, And it was only later that I realized that if a painting is a genuine thing, the reason a person stands there and has to keep looking at it is because it's making them whole.
Huh.
And a good painting is a whole thing, even if it's the painting of someone screaming. It's showing you the wholeness of screaming. And so just by looking at paintings that are compelling, a person can feel wholeness. Wholeness means to be whole means to be healed. Healing comes from whole. So painting a painting can heal a person, but seeing a painting can heal a person. Just way hearing music can transcend a person beyond time and space. And things exist inside us that we don't even know about, that are connected to ancestral things and so on. And that's what we're trying to get to, is get into that space. And so I was talking about how I get up and write. So for me, it's about words. And if I get up, that's what I get into. Although sometimes the words will lead me to music or something else, or poetry or whatever. So a person just has to find their thread. And I think the first step is the realization that everybody has it, but most people have it repressed or covered over. And so then we have to trust ourselves to find it somehow again. And I think experimentation is probably the only thing to do. I mean, a dancer, when they are really dancing, not when they're practicing, and certainly not when they're considering, what do I look like? Because in a real dance, you let go of everything that is not wholeness. So someone who's a dancer will dance themselves into wholeness. And
Mm.
and at that point, they're not thinking about what they look like or are they doing the steps right. They have become whole through the dance. And that used to be true for communities, that people
Mm.
would dance not just to learn the latest dance craze, but to dance out of the suffering and into the wholeness, even if it's just a matter of minutes or hours.
Mm.
And so I don't know how to advise people until you know them, but everyone has their thread to the dynamic of healing and to the places of wholeness. And there's so many ways it can happen.
Mm.
I mean, what we call education used to be a sacred work. The understanding was all education was leading us to the sacred.
Yeah.
And there's so much we've lost
Mm.
because museum comes from the muses.
Well,
And the idea that the museum should be completely silent is a little
yes.
offensive to the muses, who are the source of music, but also they're the source of musing,
Yes.
contemplating, and so on. And so we've kind of boxed in
Mm.
the things that were supposed to free us up. I
Mm.
mean, music is now an industry. What a
Yeah.
fallen idea is that? I mean, the
Yeah.
muses are outraged, that what? Who's in charge of this? And so
Yeah.
that's another thing. I think people don't understand that if a person has ideas and images, the beginning of a song or the beginning of a painting or the beginning of a weaving or almost anything that we could make because humans are naturally makers,
Mm.
um, it's not coming from us. It's coming through us. There's the joke in the United States about the two famous songwriters and singers, and one of them has become a father and is driving his kids to school or some meeting or something, and the muses are sending a song, and he's driving along, and he's saying, "Stop it! I can't do it right now. I'm being a father." And then finally he says, "Well, give it to so and so," because the understanding suddenly hit him that all of the artists are being inspired by the unseen, and I like to call them the muses. And so in a way, what we have to break down is the barriers between us and the unseen. And once that breaks down, I'm sure you know it as a painter,
Mm.
there's times when I'm not sure what to paint or I can't see it. And there's other times where I can't stop it. I could paint
Yeah.
24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And that begins to be the negotiation with one's own genius about how, the first problem is you don't have a genius. And the second problem is you found your genius,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
right?
Exactly.
Now you have to live with it. And
Yeah.
living with it is both the suffering and the joy, and you
Yeah.
wind up being in the suffering and the joy in the way that it's delivered to each of us.
Mm.
So, I don't know if that helps, but
Mm.
if people don't know they have genius in them, if people don't know that they have the thread of creativity by the very nature of their soul,
Yeah.
and it's unique in them, then they're lost a little bit. And
Yeah.
I hear I've heard this so many times. I'm 50 years old and I don't know anything. I don't have a gift. Yes, you do. You just haven't found it. And I guess you could call it the ego,
Mm-hmm.
is defended against. Because once you enter the creative energies, the boundaries are gone.
Yeah. And
I
then all
mean,
bets are off. I mean, your life can change in an instance.
yeah.
Uh,
And so
yeah.
people are afraid of that too. But the part of people that's afraid is the ego.
Yeah.
The
Can
ego,
I? Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
Well, the ego has to let go
Yes.
so that a person becomes a channel in a way that is quite natural to them.
Yeah. So one of the things, and I'm going to touch into this towards the end because I think there's so many things that you offer that are beautiful and important and meaningful, especially at this moment in time, but in general. But one of the things that I really love about your being in the world is the Living Myth podcast. And I've been listening to it for a long time. And I would love to ask you if you'd be happy to share the idea of the forgetting that happens as souls come into the world. Because I think at this moment in time, when you talked about someone, who might be in their 50s and say, I don't know how to begin, I don't have anything specific to me, like it's a beautiful myth and story that touched me deeply. I wondered if you might be happy to share it.
So this is a myth that appears in lots of places, but the briefest, most compact version I found was from a tribe in Central Africa. So
Mhm.
they say that, first of all, they posit the tree of life, the world tree, goes by different names. And they say that the souls, before they come into the manifest world or the recognizable materialistic world, the world of
Right.
time and place, the souls are sitting on the branches of the world tree. And they're watching what we call the world and what's going on in the world. It's like their version of streaming. They're and they're watching, the people, and the people are going around. Some are making bombs, and other are having peace marches. All that's going on, and it's both suffering and joy, and it's endless. But then a particular soul sees something happening in the world, and often something happening to certain people, whatever it is, and
Mm.
gets really compelled by it, and then goes, "Okay, I'm going. I'm
Go
going to
again.
leave the tree of life. I'm going to leave the eternal realm. I'm going." And so
Wow.
then now the soul is headed for the world. It's headed for a womb to be born. And as soon as it's headed for the world, this spirit shows up, and says, "Okay, I see where you're going, and let me inform you a little bit about the journey, a little bit about what you've chosen." So the spirit gives the soul information about what's going to happen, not like predetermined, but here's like part of the script. Here's what you've just committed to. And so now, and then the spirit goes, "Actually, this is so interesting. I'll go with you." So now the spirit and the soul are on their way to the
Tag
world.
team.
Yes. And on the way, they enter this garden, and in the middle of the garden is this beautiful tree. Well, they've just departed from the tree of life, and now
Right.
they're facing another tree, and the soul can't help it. It really wants to just embrace the tree. But at this point, it's called the tree of forgetfulness.
Mm.
And as soon as the soul touches the tree, it forgets what it saw that it wanted to go and encounter in the world, and it forgets what the spirit told it about it, and then it's in the womb, and then it gets born.
Brutal.
So so we each have our aim, we have the plot line that's gonna unfold from us, we have a purpose, we have something to give, we have something to receive, and we've all forgotten what it was. And so then rite of passage, understood in its deepest sense, would be the awakening of that
Mm.
by departing from everything. The first step of rite of passage is to separate. You separate from the family. You separate from the village. It happens in nature. And then the next phase is called the liminal, betwixt and between, which
Mm.
is where we all are now. We're all living in the betwixt and between. No one knows what's coming, and everyone under pressure will agree the world that we used to know is gone.
Yeah.
And so we're in a collective rite of passage. In the meantime, each person gets into this uncertain space in order to awaken to what's already inside, which is the story trying to unfold from us. And the more we can connect to that, and the more than we can trust it, it's not that we don't suffer. We just
Mm.
suffer in the right direction. We're
Excellent.
suffering, we're suffering into a greater sense of creativity, and then we're contributing to the world. And then it's not that this isn't a scary world to be in, and it's
Yeah.
not that it isn't dark and oppressive. It's that we know who we are in the midst of that,
Mm.
and we still have something to offer. And we have our own ways and our own practices for connecting to whatever you want to call it, the eternal, the creative, the wholeness, the presence of one's own soul.
Mm.
And the more a person is aligned with that, the more they have to give, the more if you're in touch with your inner gift, the more you give it, the more it's present. It doesn't you don't run out
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
came from the other world. It's not limited, but also the more we learn that, the more we're present. And one of the things that's missing in the world now is presence. I
Mm.
watch the politicians. They're handed these opportunities to deal with power and deal with change, and most of them are not present. You can tell when they talk. They don't have enough presence
Yeah.
to be able to stand in touch with the earth and open to the unseen enough to become a vehicle for truth and meaning and healing. And so we need people to be more present, and the person is most present when they're aligned with the inner thing that's essential to them, the genius, the quality of their own soul, and the way that they were intended to be in the world. So that's the little story.
I love that story. And I love especially the part where one embraces the tree and then forgets. Um,
Yep.
so there's
How,
sorry, go on.
how else explain that we're here and most people don't know what to do? We forgot
Yeah. Yeah.
because we're moving from the eternal to the time bound. That's also what the forgetting is about. That we moved out of, this. No one can explain this and no one can prove it either way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I like to think of the soul coming into the world as a unique essence that's here to give, here to create,
Mm.
and here to unfold a story that's meaningful.
Mm. So, in our previous conversation, you're talking about one of the things that you talked about was being in this very creative time, and that the two archetypes that you touched on being particularly present were creation and chaos. And you've touched on this a little bit. Um, can you speak perhaps a little bit more to that theme of creation and chaos in any way you feel moved to?
Okay. So, so this is another basic separation and basic tension.
Mm.
So in myths all around the world, creation is preceded by chaos. And
Mm.
and chaos, the word chaos is close to the word chasm. It's like what you were talking about when you were
Yes.
falling
Yes.
endlessly. So chaos is the chasm of darkness.
Wow.
We all think of it as disorder, and that is part of chaos. But also part of chaos is darkness and emptiness and descent.
Yeah.
And so all of that is there before creation. No chaos, no creation. The
Mm.
world is made between these two big forces of chaos and order or chaos and creation. And it's going back and forth all the time. It's happening in nature in all kinds of places. So because chaos precedes creation, every time we feel things are chaotic, we are closer to being creative.
Well.
So you take the individual artist and whatever the job is. I mean, I have a friend who's a songwriter, good songwriter. But now the concert is coming up and these new songs have to be done by the
Yeah.
band and it's not finished. And what seemed lyrical and the music was there and then it feels like, no, now we're in chaos. We can't finish it. It's not sounding right. Under the pressure of the deadline of bringing it from inside creatively out into the manifest world.
Mm.
And so we're always going back and forth ourselves between chaos, feeling that we're not worth it, collapsing inside ourselves, getting lost in our anxieties. But if we see that as part of the creative process,
Mm.
we can become more tolerant and more forgiving to ourselves.
Mm.
The first problem is you haven't found your creative path. The second problem is you found your creative path. And now the muses are saying, get bigger. Get bigger. You can do this better. You can do this more. But in order to get the bigger space, we have to solve some of the issues that keep us small. Like for some reason, I just thought of my father. And my father, I mean, he was a gentle soul in some ways, but he had like a third grade education. And he lived the family was in poverty and couldn't go to school. He had
Mm.
and so his dreams were crushed. And that was he was depressed, and I figured out it was because his dreams were crushed. So I would come home from school or something, excited about something, and he would not be able to accept that.
Oh.
He would say, "Well, who do you think you are?" That was one of his things. "Who do you think you are?" And it was confusing to me. I go, "I don't know. I thought I was your son, but that's not working out. Maybe I'm something
Oh.
else." And I was hearing this as a philosophical question. And it was only late it was only later that I realized once I let go of my disappointment and my hurt, it was a
Yeah.
pretty good question. Who do I who do I think I am? And then it becomes a creative dilemma.
Yeah.
And nobody's here to be a small person. It doesn't mean everybody should be loud. It just means no soul is small. But usually the people that we depend upon early on, if they haven't found their dream,
Mm.
they don't know how to respond to the awakening dream of their own children. And the same thing happens in school. If the teachers in school, whatever level
Oof.
you're thinking about, haven't found their dream and figured out how to live it to some degree, they cannot recognize and therefore they cannot bless the dreams of the students that they're teaching.
Yeah.
At the same time, almost anyone can recall this one teacher or
Yeah.
this one, right? Because
Yeah.
that person saw your soul. They
Mm.
saw your potential. And we need that desperately. And so there's really two things going on. A person has to become aware of their own natural gifts, but unless someone blesses them, we can't hold them.
Yes.
And so everybody has to eventually risk putting it out there. And usually there's someone that goes, "Oh, I saw that. Oh, I
Yeah.
see that," you know,
Totally.
and that's the blessing
Yeah.
because they have to give us our gifts in a more conscious way. But yeah, I'll also say this. So everybody needs practices.
Yeah.
It turns out that you cannot continue to grow psychically, spiritually, and creatively without practices. Artists usually develop their strange practices, like, right, before I can write in the morning, I need black tea. Now, I probably don't really need black tea, but it works.
Yeah.
I need something. There's some engagement I need with anyway, but that turns out to be my little ritual
Mm.
because that tells all the inner psychic members, "Oh, yeah, he's gonna go writing now." You know?
Yeah.
So cut it out. Don't get worried about things.
Mm.
Um, so ritual is also art, and art is also ritual.
Mm.
And so I know that I know a lot of artists who will say, "God, I can't even enter the studio. I can't find my way in." And once we realize the way in is through a ritual of some kind, all of a sudden we have more access.
Hmm.
And so I don't know if that's helpful, but I think to survive in the world right now, we need practices.
Yeah.
Um, and the other thing I would say that over time, the practices have to change.
Hmm.
And, so the old idea is there's two roads of practice. It's a little bit simplistic, but it's helpful. One is the road of contemplation and meditation,
Yeah.
the inner road of practice, and the other is artistic expression.
Yeah.
They're opposites. And some people will go their whole life mainly on one road, but a lot of us will go back and forth.
Mm.
And so a person needs to make adjustments in the practice in order to keep finding the place of presence. And when we're in the place of presence, we have both more stillness and we also have more creative energy because they both practices come from the same core. And both
Beautiful.
practices, like in ancient India, were considered sacred. All of the art was an expression of the divine, just as all of the meditation was a way to catch or touch the divine. It was all coming from the same place. It's interesting too, though, because the way of meditation and contemplation was called the negative road,
Hmm.
and the way of art was called the positive road. It's
Wow.
funny, it's almost gotten reversed now. So that, and the reason it was a negative road was because the person who was in the practice of contemplation um, and meditation was going, "No, no, not distraction, not hunger, not this, not
Yeah.
that." And so that was called the great nay or the negative
Mm.
road. Whereas the artist is going, "Yes, yes, I'll paint this, I'll paint that." You know, that looks like a god to me. Any tree will work,
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
and so that's the other thing. How does a person figure out which kind of person they are? I'm on the
Mm.
expressive road. I know that.
Mm.
But I have to learn meditation and contemplation
Yeah.
to settle and hmm, there's a whole other learning in that. But
Mm.
ultimately for me, it's going to wind up being expressive speech, really, words.
Mm.
Um, but still, those are there. They've always been there. And they're there for everybody to keep finding their presence and their creative potentials.
It's curious as you're talking about the kind of the inner world and the outer world, or the meditative, contemplative, saying no to things, and then the expressive idea generating or invoking of the muses outside, kind of bringing form to things. In my mind, I saw this image of a great oak, and there's this idea in the ways in which trees grow, which is gravitropic growth, positive gravitropic growth, which is when the roots, or the seed, first of all, from the seed, the taproot goes down in the direction in which gravity is pulling it, and then puts out the other roots in order to then be able to grow through negative gravitropic growth, which is when it's going against gravity. So first the work downwards to anchor oneself before it can then burst out and have the strength to flourish in the light. And I love this idea because there is something profoundly beautiful about reaching for the light, having first gone into darkness, anchoring oneself in, knowing that that's where the nourishment comes from. And then the additional metaphor, which I love, is that if your roots are sufficiently deep and held, then you can withstand a lot more of the storms. And I think for you were mentioning about saying no to things, as someone who paints and sings, or you having your practice in the morning after your ritual of the black tea, like we have to sometimes say no to the rest of the world for a pocket of time to be able to summon the muses or to draw from within oneself that which wants to be said or felt or become witness to whatever wants to take shape. And so there's something really curious about those qualities working together to be able to have the strength, the stillness, the rootedness to bring something forth and to bat away all the distractions and the storms of news cycles and all the rest of it, to be able to, and also boring stuff like administrative stuff or emails or the pings on the phone. Like these seem like tiny things, but they can be paper cuts to creativity.
Yeah.
And to that deeper listening and that
Yeah.
quietude that can allow us to connect somehow, I think.
Totally. I'm really with you. You can call it creative isolation. That a person has to learn the practice of creative isolation in
Okay.
order to not be distracted away from what's really trying to happen.
Yes.
It's beautiful that you went to the oak tree, because the acorn theory is the old idea that from ancient Greece, you could call it the acorn myth, but they use oak trees in imagining the genius of a person, because the oaks were sacred trees. And so the idea was that inside the acorn, there's an entire oak tree.
Yes.
All right. So the same idea was the human soul. Inside the soul, at the birth of the individual person, there's an acorn in there. And the whole creative life of that person is in there, as big as an oak tree is in comparison to an acorn.
That's
And
so
so they
funny.
called that the acorn theory. Because if you imagine it as an acorn, it has to grow into an oak tree.
Yeah.
It can't become an elm tree or something. And that's the way we are. Our inner acorn has to grow into something. And then each tree is unique, just like each bird. And so then each person is their own inner acorn. And when we crack it open, and the sense of cracking gives you a little sense of pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something has to crack open. You could call it the ego. And that shell of the ego has to crack for the acorn to begin to grow. And just as you beautifully described it, it begins by growing down.
Yeah.
And we have to get our deep roots of self, because they can bring up the energy and the minerals, all the things we need. And then we can get a strong enough trunk. And then we can withstand the storm of the outer world, which goes back to my idea that if the more people that can awaken to who we already are inside and get our roots anchored deeply enough, we can stand in the midst of the tension of opposites and the storms of confusion, and we can produce more acorns, which produce more individual trees. We can join the process of creation, which is going on day and night in nature, and we can become, the elders in many cultures were imagined to stand like trees. And they had but they weren't rigid. They
Yes.
were
Yeah.
fluid enough to bend with the winds and the weathers. And so that's beautiful that you went to the oak tree, because
It's
that's
so
where
funny.
yeah.
But funny that you mentioned the acorn. I've literally just, you know what? I'm just going to grab it one sec. Hold on. I mean, this isn't going to go out on video. Maybe this will be used in the clip, but I've literally just finished, as part of this shamanic series that I'm doing, a painting called The Promise, and it's of a leaf of an oak.
Yes.
And what you're
You-
describing about the acorn and the
Yeah.
promise of the soul that then
Yeah.
forgets upon, embracing the tree. This is all very beautiful. So we're coming close to time, and I would love to spend a few moments talking about your forthcoming book. You are someone who, for me, has a huge presence of compassion and ignition, like igniting people to come into contact with their thread, their genius of creativity. Can you tell us a bit about this book that's coming out and what it is?
Good question. So talk about the tension of opposites and the tension of that everybody enters when they enter creative efforts.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with this book,
Mm.
and the working title is A Time of Transformation on Earth.
Huh.
And the premise is that we are in the middle of a transformation of both the natural world and the cultural world, because they're secretly connected, even though we've been told that they're opposites. They're actually secretly connected. Human nature is connected to great nature. And so part of the book is about how transformation happens in nature, in particular caterpillars and butterflies, which is just a stunning story that, I mean, there's so many beautiful points in it, like the idea the caterpillar has to die for the butterfly to be born.
Mm.
And then you can extract from that a caterpillar knows nothing about a butterfly.
Yeah.
And you could say that our ego knows nothing about the thing trying to get born and get wings from inside ourselves. So I'm using it that way, using the natural things to be a lens into the psyche. But also because we're in this period of collapse and renewal, we are in a transformative process. And so everything that we can learn about transformation can help us locate where we are, weather the storms, and then begin to be more confidently and accurately creative with our own capacities and our own callings. And so that's the idea of the book. But I am struggling. It's as if the book is making me transform. And and for instance, since you brought this up, I cannot write the way I wrote other books.
Wow.
It's painfully clear that I can't do that. And so I'm in this little struggle, maybe not so little struggle about how this book wants me to write it. And this is similar to what I said at the beginning. I found stories were living through me. Like I'm working on this story and it's actually living in me now. And I have to not just carry it, but it's carrying me and it's it's reshaping my life from within.
Mm.
And this book is doing the same thing. So I'd love to say, yeah, and it's going to come out on this date and then maybe, people can buy it. But I don't know what's going to happen. I'm in that position of not
Yeah.
knowing that I've been talking about so much in public. And so, but the idea, even if the book never happened, what I'm trying to do is give language and imagination to the sense that we are in the midst of a transformation collectively, like a collective rite of passage, but we are each also our own acorn trying to transform into a tree which has echoes of the tree of life, which gives us a way to stand and a rooted way to being in a world that's going to be probably troubled for quite a while. And I'm just trying to give more voice to the idea that our souls are here to transform. The acorn is there, not every acorn makes it into a tree, but the acorn is there to become a tree, a specific tree. Should it become a tree, it will be unique. And we are that. Our souls are here to transform, to shed forms, like the snake that sheds skin. And then we come out more alive. And that's what we're here to do. And the time to do it more than any other time is when everything is falling apart. The unity that we love to find in the world, we are not going to find. There isn't going to be a sense of unity in the world for a while. That unity has to be found inside ourselves. And when we go looking for that, we find that we have to transform and we have to shed the skins that were put on us, shed the adaptations we made in order to survive our own childhood and youth. We have to do that shedding process in which is similar to what's going on inside the cocoon of the caterpillar, which actually melts.
Yeah, it's
And
bonkers.
it melts into almost nothing, into chaos.
Mm,
In the cocoon, chaos precedes the butterfly.
mm,
And then one thing I'll say, because this is amazing thing in this study, they've been studying caterpillars and butterflies for thousands of years. It's been a mystery of transformation. It's a beautiful gift of nature. But lately, they figured out that the cells of the caterpillar are actually trying to destroy the cells of the butterfly. So the tension we feel as artists and creative people or healers or
mm,
whatever it is as severe as that. There's part of us that's afraid of the butterfly in us,
mm.
that's afraid of the spirit in us, that's afraid of the creativity we really have. And that part will actually resist it. And the
Wow.
resistance is natural because the caterpillar resists the presence of the butterfly at every level. And when they figured that out, they were really surprised. And then they found out they tried to bypass the resistance of the caterpillar and speed the process up. And what happened is the butterflies that formed could not get out of the cocoon.
Wow.
They didn't have the strength to break the shell of the cocoon because they hadn't gone through the struggle of resistance with the caterpillar.
Wow.
So our resistance is not intended to stop us. It's intended to clarify and strengthen the butterfly or the wings we're trying to get. And so I think that's really helpful. And I'm telling that to myself because it might
Mm.
help me finish writing the book.
Michael,
Well,
I could listen and talk to you for probably days, probably weeks. But we don't have the luxury of that time. But thank you so much for everything that you've shared today, for the gift of your presence and conversation. Uh, I'll include so that people can find out if and when the book emerges and what kind of transformative journey you've experienced and undergone. I will link to your website and to the Living Myth. Yeah, so people can reach out and be in touch with you.
thank you. And emergence is probably the right word. Something's trying to emerge and
Emergence.
it's pushing parts of me out of the way and I'm resisting. But in the meantime, it's great to see you and great to be in conversation with you again.
Likewise. Thank you so much.